Picture this. You're a scientist on a remote research station, floating in the black void of space, orbiting some massive gas giant that's so far from civilization that your emergency beacon takes 3 days just to reach the nearest cooperative outpost. Your life support systems are failing, making that awful wheezing sound. That means you've got maybe a week before you're breathing vacuum. And to make things worse, there's a pack of space pirates circling your station like hungry vultures, waiting for the perfect moment to swoop in and take everything you've worked for. Dr. HFY, the head researcher at the Zolani station, was living exactly this nightmare. For 3 straight days, he'd been sending the same desperate message into the endless black of space. This is Research Station Zolani 7, requesting immediate assistance. Life support failing. Hostile vessels in system. Please respond. Over and over, like a broken record, hoping against hope that anyone would hear them. The Corvani raiders have been playing with them like cats with mice. 12 massive warships, each one bigger than the entire research station, just sitting there at the edge of the system, close enough to be threatening, far enough away to avoid any cooperative patrols that might wander by. HFY knew what they were waiting for. Once the station's defenses went completely offline, once the crew was too weak from failing life support to fight back, the raiders would move in. They'd strip the place clean of valuable research data, rare minerals, and advanced technology. Any survivors would be sold to the slave markets in the Outer Rim territories. The research team had already started rationing their food and water. The air recyclers were working overtime, producing that metallic taste that meant the filters were nearly shot. Some of the junior researchers had started talking about surrender, thinking maybe the Corvani would show mercy if they cooperated. HFY knew better. He'd heard the stories from other stations that had fallen to these raiders. Mercy wasn't in their vocabulary. Then, on the 3rd day, when hope was as thin as the station's failing atmosphere, something impossible happened. The communication console chirped with an incoming transmission. Not the crisp, clean signal they were expecting from a cooperative rescue fleet, but something else entirely. Something rough and primitive, crackling through space on old-fashioned radio frequencies that most civilized species had stopped using centuries ago. HFY rushed to the console, his 3-fingered hands shaking as he opened the channel. The voice that came through was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It spoke in a language that the universal translator struggled to process, but the meaning was clear enough. This is Captain Jake Morrison of a United Earthship Defiance. We received your distress call. Help is on the way. Hold tight and keep your heads down. We'll be there soon. The voice was completely casual, like the speaker was discussing the weather instead of mounting a rescue operation across impossible distances. There was no panic, no concern about the odds, no request for tactical information about the hostile forces. Just a simple statement of fact. Help was coming. But here's what made HFY's blood run cold, what made his 4 hearts skip beats in his chest. According to every star chart the Zolani had, every database in the Galactic Cooperative's vast archives, nothing lived in the direction these humans claimed to come from. That entire sector of space was marked in red on every navigation system, a dead zone of extreme stellar radiation, gravitational anomalies that could tear ships apart, and cosmic storms that made travel impossible. The official designation was Hazard Zone Gamma 7, no known life forms. Extreme caution advised. It was a kind of place where even the most advanced cooperative survey ships refused to go, where automated probes simply vanished without sending back so much as a single data packet. What kind of species could not only survive in a place like that, but actually call a home? What kind of beings could build ships capable of crossing such dangerous territory just to answer a distress call from complete strangers? As HFY stared out the station's main viewport at the distant stars, watching the Corvani ships slowly closing their trap, he wondered if they'd just been saved or they'd simply traded one threat for something potentially far worse. In all his years studying alien cultures and civilizations, he'd never encountered anything like this. A species that lived in the most dangerous region of known space, traveling impossible distances to help strangers, speaking with the casual confidence of people who'd seen everything the universe could throw at them and somehow survived. The waiting began. In the depths of space, something was coming, something that called themselves humans, and they were either the answer to their prayers or their worst nightmare made real. When the human fleet finally showed up, they didn't make the kind of elegant, graceful entrance you'd expect from an advanced civilization. You know how in all those space movies, the good guys arrive with perfect formations, smooth transitions from hyperspace, and everything looking neat and organized? Yeah, forget all that. These ships literally tore holes in the fabric of space itself. Imagine the most violent thunderstorm you've ever seen, then multiply that by 1,000 and set it loose in the vacuum of space. That's what it looked like when the humans arrived. Their ships didn't phase transition like civilized species do, sliding smoothly from faster-than-light travel into normal space. Instead, they punched through reality itself, creating massive tears in space-time that erupted with bursts of exotic radiation and energy discharges that lit up the entire system like the 4th of July. Every sensor on the research station went absolutely crazy, screaming warnings about radiation levels that should have been lethal to any known life form. The Zilani scientists dove for cover, thinking they were about to be fried by some kind of cosmic phenomenon. But the humans? They seemed completely unbothered by the massive energy storm they just created. Like arriving in a blast of deadly radiation was just their normal Tuesday commute. Commander David Wilson of the U.S. Relentless stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display update as his sensors mapped out the situation. 12 Corvani heavy cruisers, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon, arranged in a perfect hunting formation around a helpless research station. Classic pirate tactics. Surround your prey, cut off all escape routes, then move in for the kill when they're too weak to fight back. Wilson had seen this exact same setup before, more times than he cared to count. Pirates were pirates, whether they were hijacking cargo ships in Earth's asteroid belt or terrorizing research stations out here on Galactic Rim. The only real difference was the scale of the operation. These Corvani raiders were probably planning to strip the place clean of anything valuable, advanced technology, rare research data, maybe even the scientists themselves if they could fetch a good price on the slave markets. The thing is, Wilson had been fighting pirates since before humanity had even figured out how to travel faster than light. Back in the early days, when Earth's colonies were scattered across a dozen different star systems and barely held together by hope and determination, raiders were a constant threat. Every cargo shipment, every supply run, every research expedition had to be ready for trouble. It was just part of life in space. As his weapons officer, Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez, ran through the enemy positions, Wilson felt that familiar sensation settle over him like an old, comfortable coat. It was a cold, calculating certainty that came from years of experience. The same feeling he'd had during the Mars Rebellion, when a handful of human ships had faced down an entire separatist fleet. Back then, everyone said it was impossible. The odds were something like 50 to 1 against, and victory seemed like nothing more than a bad joke. But here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy was about to learn the hard way. When faced with impossible odds, when everyone else would surrender or run away, humans have this weird habit of rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. Impossible wasn't a reason to give up. It was just another word for challenge accepted. Wilson looked around his bridge at his crew. Rodriguez was already calculating firing solutions, his fingers dancing across the weapon's console like he was playing a piano. Chief Engineer Lisa Park was rerouting power to the shield generators, preparing for the inevitable return fire. Navigator Ben Carter was plotting escape routes for the research station, thinking 3 moves ahead like the chess master he'd been back on Earth. These weren't superhuman warriors or genetically enhanced soldiers. They were just regular people. A mechanic from Detroit, a physics teacher from California, a former truck driver from Texas who joined the space service because he missed the open road and figured the void between stars was close enough. But they all shared something that made them uniquely human. They simply refused to quit. The Corvani had no idea what they were up against. They saw a smaller fleet, ships that looked crude compared to their sleek warships, technology that seemed primitive by galactic standards. What they didn't understand was that humans had learned to fight dirty long before they'd learned to fight clean. While other species developed elegant weapons and sophisticated tactics, humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of winning at any cost. Wilson smiled grimly as his tactical display showed the enemy ships beginning to move, clearly preparing to deal with this unexpected complication. The Corvani probably thought they could brush aside this human fleet like an annoying insect, then get back to their original plan of looting the research station. They were about to discover that humans don't brush aside easily. In fact, the harder you push them, the harder they push back. And right now, 12 Corvani heavy cruisers were about to get a very unpleasant lesson in human determination. The fight lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Not 4 minutes, not 5 minutes, but 4 minutes and 37 seconds of pure chaos that will be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Corvani fleet commander, Admiral Zextai, had been expecting the usual dance of interstellar politics. Maybe some stern warnings over the communication channels, followed by cautious negotiations. Perhaps these newcomers would demand safe passage for the research station in exchange for some valuable trade agreements. At worst, he figured they might launch a few probing attacks, test each other's defenses, maybe exchange some long-range fire before settling into the kind of prolonged siege that civilized species preferred. What he got instead was pure, concentrated violence that threw every rule of civilized warfare right out the airlock. The human ships moved like nothing the Corvani had ever encountered in 3 centuries of raiding. These weren't the careful, calculated movements of advanced warships trying to minimize risk to their crews. These were the desperate, impossible maneuvers of someone who'd rather die fighting than live surrendering. Imagine watching a fighter jet suddenly decide to ignore physics. That's what it looked like when the human vessels started their attack run. They pulled turns that generated over 20 times Earth's gravity, the kind of forces that should have liquefied any crew member into a red paste smeared across their bulkheads. But somehow, impossibly, the human pilots not only stayed conscious during these insane maneuvers, they kept fighting with deadly precision. Lieutenant Amy Patterson, piloting the fighter craft Brooklyn's Revenge, pulled a spiral dive that would have killed any other species outright. Her suit was working overtime, pumping fluid to keep blood flowing to her brain, while she calmly lined up her targeting computer on a Corvani cruiser. She'd grown up riding roller coasters at Coney Island and racing motorcycles through Manhattan traffic. A little thing like 20G turns wasn't going to stop her from doing her job. When the Corvani plasma torpedoes finally found their marks, scoring direct hits on human vessels, everyone expected those ships to die like any sensible warship would. Clean, quick, with maybe a pretty explosion for the history books. Instead, the human ships absorbed damage that would have vaporized any other vessel in the galaxy, then had the absolute audacity to keep coming back for more. The UES Thunderbolt took a direct hit from a plasma cannon that punched a hole clean through her port side. Any rational ship would have exploded or at least had the courtesy to drift helplessly through space. Instead, Chief Engineer Danny Murphy sealed the breach with emergency foam, rerouted power around the damaged sections, and had the weapons back online in under 90 seconds. When asked later how he managed to keep fighting with half his ship missing, Murphy just shrugged and said it reminded him of working on cars back in his dad's garage in Detroit. The human weapons were terrifying in their brutal simplicity. While other galactic civilizations had spent centuries perfecting elegant energy beams and exotic particle weapons, humans had taken a completely different approach. They strapped the biggest conventional explosives they could find to the fastest delivery systems they could build and called it a day. No fancy energy shields could stop a chunk of dense metal traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. No advanced armor could withstand a fusion warhead that turned sections of space into miniature suns, reaching temperatures that made the cores of stars look chilly by comparison. The human philosophy seemed to be, if brute force doesn't work, you're not using enough of it. Commander Brian Kelly, watching from the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, coordinated the attack with the calm efficiency of someone directing traffic rather than commanding a space battle. He'd learned his tactics fighting in the orbital wars around Jupiter's moons, where finesse was a luxury nobody could afford and overwhelming firepower was the only thing that kept you alive long enough to see tomorrow. By the 2-minute mark, 3 Corvani cruisers were nothing more than expanding clouds of superheated debris. By 3 minutes, the surviving raiders were beginning to understand that they'd picked a fight with something completely outside their experience. These humans didn't fight like any civilized species. They fought like cornered animals, with a desperate ferocity that suggested they'd rather die than admit defeat. When the surviving Corvani ships finally realized they were completely outclassed and tried to retreat, it was already too late. Half their fleet was spreading wreckage across the star system, and the humans were showing no signs of slowing down. If anything, they seemed to be getting more aggressive as the battle continued, like the taste of victory was making them hungry for more. But here's the part that really amazed the watching Zilani scientists. The moment the last Corvani ship jumped to hyperspace, running for their lives, the human fleet immediately switched modes. Without missing a beat, they were already launching rescue shuttles toward the research station. Like the space battle had been nothing more than clearing a minor traffic jam. For minutes and 37 seconds, from start to finish. In less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee, an entire pirate fleet had been scattered to the cosmic winds, and the humans were already moving on to their next priority, saving lives. Here's where things got really interesting, and where the Zilani scientists got their first real look at what made humans so different from every other species in the galaxy. Most civilized cultures, when faced with dangerous rescue operation in a damaged space station filled with toxic gases and unstable structures, would do the smart thing. They'd send in drones, robots, maybe some heavily shielded automated systems to handle the worst of it, while the organic crew stayed safely aboard their ships. Humans? They suited up and walked right in person. Lieutenant Amy Patterson led the first rescue team to the airlock of the damaged research station, her boots clanging against the metal deck plates as emergency lighting flickered overhead. The atmospheric readings on her suit display showed toxin levels that would have sent any other species running for the hills, but Patterson just adjusted her oxygen mix and kept moving forward like she was taking a stroll through Central Park. Dr. HFY, huddled with the other survivors in what remained of the station's main laboratory, watched through the cracked observation window as these strange beings moved through their damaged home. The humans wore what looked like personal armor more than environmental suits, thick and bulky, but somehow not slowing them down at all. Through the clear faceplates, he could see their features. Bipedal creatures with forward-facing eyes like predators, and expressions of calm determination that suggested they'd done this kind of thing before. The first human to reach their shelter was Corpsman Jake Rodriguez, a medic whose gentle hands and steady voice immediately put the terrified scientist at ease. When he started treating Dr. Veldar, whose respiratory system had been badly damaged by chemical leaks from the station's damaged life support, HFY watched something incredible happen. The toxin readings in that section of the station were off the charts. The chemical cocktail floating through the air would have killed most sentient beings in minutes, maybe seconds. But Rodriguez worked calmly and efficiently, his movements sure and practiced as he administered treatments and stabilized the injured researcher. When HFY checked his readings again, he realized that the human was breathing the same poison air through his suit's filtration system, completely unbothered by toxin levels that should have been lethal. "How are you doing this?" HFY asked through the universal translator, his voice shaking with amazement and fear. Rodriguez looked up from his patient, and through his faceplate, the Zilani scientist could see him actually smile. "Doc, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. You learn to breathe all kind of interesting stuff when you're a kid playing near the chemical plants. This is actually pretty mild compared to what we used to call Tuesday morning air back home." But the real show started when they heard the calls for help from the lower levels. A structural collapse had trapped 3 Zilani researchers in what used to be the geology lab, now buried under several tons of twisted metal and broken support beams. The ceiling had come down during the pirate attack, and the survivors were running out of air fast. Any rational species would have called for proper cutting equipment, maybe brought in heavy machinery, to carefully lift the debris piece by piece. The rescue operation would have taken hours, maybe days, with plenty of time to plan and minimize risks to both the rescuers and the people trapped below. The humans took one look at the situation, calculated how much air the trapped scientists had left, and decided that proper procedure was a luxury they couldn't afford. Sergeant Bobby Thompson, a demolitions expert from somewhere called Texas, started placing shaped charges around the collapsed structure with the casual precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Yo, might want to step back a bit," he told the watching aliens, his drawl somehow making the impending explosion sound like no big deal. The blast was controlled but still powerful enough to shake the entire section of the station. When the smoke cleared, Thompson and his team were already moving into the gap they created, manually lifting chunks of twisted metal that weighed several tons each. not with mechanical assistance or anti-gravity devices, but with their bare hands and what appeared to be pure stubbornness. HFY watched Private Lisa-chan, who couldn't have weighed more than 60 kilograms soaking wet, grab a support beam that had to weigh at least 3 tons and simply lift it out of the way. When he asked her how this was possible, she just shrugged and said something about CrossFit and growing up on a farm where you learn to move heavy things because nobody else was going to do it for you. The 3 trapped researchers were pulled out alive, conscious, and relatively unharmed within 20 minutes of the humans' arrival. What should have been a complex, hours-long rescue operation involving specialized equipment and careful planning had been reduced to a simple problem with a simple solution. Apply sufficient force until the obstacle stops being an obstacle. As HFY watched these remarkable beings work, he began to understand something that would haunt his dreams and reshape his understanding of the universe. These humans operated on a principle that was both terrifying and amazing. Death was just another problem to solve through sufficient application of willpower and control violence. They treated impossibility like a personal insult, something to be overcome through sheer determination rather than accepted as a limitation. When Corpseman Rodriguez finished treating the last of the injured and packed up his medical kit, he looked around at the gathered Zilani scientists with that same calm expression. "Is that everybody?" he asked, like he hadn't just performed miracles in a toxic environment that should have killed him. Because if there's anyone else who needs help, now would be the time to speak up. We've got places to be and people to save. After the dust settled and the last of the injured had been treated, Dr. HFY found himself in a conversation that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. He was standing near the station's main viewport with Commander David Wilson, watching something he'd never seen before in all his years studying different alien cultures. Human engineers were floating outside the station in their bulky work suits, carefully constructing what looked like a memorial beacon. It was a simple thing, really, just a small satellite with a broadcasting array and some kind of crystalline structure that caught the light from the system's star. But the way the humans worked on it, the reverence in their movements, told HFY this was something deeply important to their species. "It's for our people who didn't make a home," Wilson explained, noticing the scientist's curious gaze. Danny Kim, Lisa O'Connor, and Tony Martinez. They died getting your people out of that collapsed section. We always build these after a mission where we lose someone. It broadcasts their names, their service records, tells anyone who passes by that they were here and they mattered. HFY felt his heart skip a beat. 3 humans had died saving his colleagues, people they'd never met, from a species they'd never encountered, on a research station they'd had no reason to care about. And instead of demanding payment or expecting gratitude, they were building monuments to honor their fallen. The question that had been burning in his mind since the first transmission finally came out. "Commander Wilson, I have to ask something that's been troubling me. Why did you come here? Why would your people risk everything, travel across impossible distances, fight a superior force, all for complete strangers? What could you possibly gain from this?" Wilson was quiet for a long moment, watching his people work outside. When he finally spoke, his words would echo through galactic history for thousands of years to come. "Doc, let me tell you about Earth," Wilson said, his voice carrying the weight of countless generations. "My people come from a world that spent millions of years actively trying to kill us. And I mean that literally. Ice ages that lasted hundreds of thousands of years, turning most of the planet into a frozen wasteland where only the toughest survived. Supervolcanoes that blocked out the sun for decades at a time. Asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species and forced the survivors to start over from scratch." He paused, pointing out at the stars visible through the viewport. "And the predators document. You think those Corvani raiders were dangerous? Earth had creatures that made them look like house pets. Saber-toothed cats the size of small vehicles. Pack hunters with intelligence that rivaled early humans. Bears that could tear through trees like paper. For millions of years, everything on our planet was either trying to eat us, poison us, freeze us, or crush us." HFY listened in fascination as Wilson continued. "But here's the thing we learned real early in our development. Cooperation isn't just a nice idea. It's the difference between living and dying. When the Ice Age hit, the tribes that shared food and shelter survived. When the predators came hunting, The groups that worked together lived to see another day. Helping others wasn't charity or some noble ideal. It was pure survival strategy. Wilson turned to face the Zolani scientists directly. See, we figured out something that most species never learn. When you help someone else survive today, there's a better chance they'll be there to help you survive tomorrow. Every person you save might be the one who pulls you out of the fire someday. Every favor you do creates a debt that the universe might pay back when you need it most. As they talked, Wilson's technical officers were busy downloading something to the station's computer systems. HFY watched in amazement as terabytes of data flowed across the screens. Detailed specifications for advanced weapon systems, defensive technologies, and tactical procedures that were clearly decades ahead of anything in the Galactic Cooperative's databases. You're just giving this away? HFY asked, incredulous. No trade agreements? No payment? No political demands. Wilson shrugged. Information wants to be free. Document. Besides, the stronger you are, the less likely it is that some other group of pirates will try this again. We won't always be around to help, so we might as well make sure you can help yourselves. As the human fleet prepared to leave, their ships warming up their impossible engines for another journey through the deadly void they called home, HFY realized something that would reshape the galaxy forever. Somewhere out there in the darkness, humanity was building more ships, training more crews, setting up listening posts to monitor distress signals. They'd turned helping strangers into a science, a military doctrine, a way of life. The age of humanity had begun. And for the first time in millennia, those who preyed on the weak had something to fear lurking in the darkness between the stars. Not some ancient weapon or advanced technology, but something far more dangerous. People who'd learned that the best way to survive in a hostile universe was to make sure nobody had to face alone. And that changed everything.